I was a struggling college student who could barely afford textbooks when I saw an elderly woman crying over her dying garden. I offered to help her save it, spending weeks nursing her plants back to life with everything I learned in my botany classes. What I didn't know was that this woman owned my apartment building and had just signed the eviction notice that would make my family homeless in 30 days. Before we dive in, I'm curious. Have you ever helped a stranger without expecting anything in return? Tell me about it in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that prove kindness always comes back to us. Now, let me take you back to that spring morning. I thought my life was falling apart. I was 22 years old, a senior biology major at State University, working 2 part-time jobs and still struggling to make ends meet. My mother, Carmen, had been laid off from her job at the textile factory 6 months earlier, and despite applying everywhere, she couldn't find work that paid enough to cover our basic expenses. We lived in a small 2-bedroom apartment in Harmony Gardens, a modest complex on the edge of town that had seen better days. The rent was $800 a month, reasonable by most standards, but impossible when you're living on a student's income and unemployment benefits. We'd managed to scrape together partial payments for a while, but we were now 3 months behind, and I could see the worry lines deepening around my mother's eyes every day. "Sweetheart," she would say to me in the evenings, as we sat at our small kitchen table, surrounded by bills and job applications, "maybe you should take a semester off, get a full-time job. Your education can wait." But I couldn't bear the thought of stopping so close to graduation. I was just 8 months away from my degree in botany, 8 months away from the career I dreamed of since I was a little girl collecting leaves and pressing flowers between the pages of old books. Plants had always been my refuge, my passion, my way of understanding the world. Even in our tiny apartment, I'd managed to create a small indoor garden, succulents on the windowsill, herbs growing in recycled containers, a small lemon tree I'd nursed from a seed. "We'll figure it out, Mom," I told her, though I had no idea how. The morning that changed everything started like any other. I was walking to my job at the campus bookstore, taking my usual route through the older residential neighborhood that bordered the university. It was early May, and the world was exploding with spring growth. Dogwood trees heavy with white blossoms, azaleas painting the yards in brilliant pinks and purples, the air sweet with the scent of blooming jasmine. I was admiring a particularly beautiful rose garden when I heard the sound of crying. I stopped and looked around, finally spotting an elderly woman sitting on a small bench in what had once been a magnificent garden, but now looked like a botanical disaster zone. She was probably in her 70s, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and wearing a floral dress that had seen better days. But it was her garden that broke my heart. The flower beds were overrun with weeds, the roses were covered in black spot and aphids, and what had once been a carefully planned landscape was now a tangle of dying plants and invasive growth. The woman was holding a small watering can in her lap, tears streaming down her face as she stared at the devastation around her. I should have kept walking. I was already running late for work, and I had a biology exam to study for during my lunch break. But something about the sight of this woman mourning her garden pulled at my heart. I thought about my own small collection of plants, how devastated I would be if something happened to them. Before I could talk myself out of it, I walked up the garden path and approached the bench. "Excuse me," I said gently, "are you all right?" The woman looked up at me with eyes that were red from crying. "Oh, hello, dear. I'm sorry, I didn't see you there." "I couldn't help but notice your garden," I said, gesturing to the flower beds around us. "It looks like it was beautiful once." "It was," she said with a sad smile. "My husband, Harold, and I spent 40 years creating this garden together. Every plant, every flower bed, every tree, we planned it all together. It was our pride and joy." "What happened to it?" "Harold passed away 2 years ago," she explained, her voice thick with emotion. I tried to keep it up, but I'm not as strong as I used to be, and I don't have his knowledge. This spring, everything just fell apart. Some kind of disease got into the roses, the weeds took over, and I don't know how to fix any of it. I looked around the garden with new eyes, my botany training automatically cataloging the problems I could see. The roses had black spot fungus infection, which was treatable. The weeds were mostly common varieties that could be managed with the right approach. The soil looked compacted and probably needed amendment, but the basic structure of the garden was still sound. I'm studying botany at the university, I said impulsively. I might be able to help you figure out what's wrong. The woman's face lit up with hope. Really? You would do that? I'd be happy to take a look, I said, already mentally rolling up my sleeves. I'm Sophia, by the way. Grace Butler, she said, standing up and shaking my hand with surprising strength. And you have no idea what this means to me. I was just sitting here thinking I might have to give up and pave over the whole thing. Oh no, I said, horrified at the thought. This garden has too much history, too much love in it to give up on. Let me see what I can do. I spent the next hour walking through Grace's garden, examining plants, testing soil, and making mental notes about what needed to be done. The problems were significant, but not insurmountable. The roses needed treatment for the fungal infection and proper pruning. The weeds needed to be cleared, but carefully, so as not to damage the perennial plants that were still viable. The soil needed organic matter and better drainage in some areas. The good news is, I told Grace as we sat on her back porch with glasses of iced tea, that most of these problems can be fixed. It's going to take time and work, but your garden can be beautiful again. How much would something like that cost? Grace asked, and I could see the worry in her eyes. I thought about the treatments needed, the soil amendments, the new plants that would have to be purchased to replace the ones that were too far gone. It would probably cost several $100s, money I was sure Grace didn't have any more than my family did. What if we did it together? I suggested. I could provide the knowledge and the labor, and you could cover the cost of materials as we go, a little at a time. I love working with plants, and I could use the practical experience for my studies. You would really do that? Grace asked, her eyes filling with tears again, but happy tears this time. I would love to do that, and I meant it. There was something about this garden, about Grace's obvious love for it, that called to me. When would you like to start? How about tomorrow? I'll make us lunch, and you can show me what needs to be done. I was an hour late for work that day, but I didn't care. I'd found something that felt more important than any part-time job, a chance to bring something beautiful back to life. Over the next 3 weeks, I fell into a routine that became the highlight of my days. Every morning before classes, I would stop by Grace's house to check on the plants and do whatever work I could fit into my schedule. Every afternoon, I would return for a few more hours of weeding, pruning, and soil preparation. Grace was the perfect gardening partner. She had an encyclopedic knowledge of what had been planted where, and she was eager to learn about the science behind the treatments I was applying. I taught her about soil pH and beneficial insects, about companion planting and organic pest control. She taught me about the history of each plant, the stories behind every flower bed. Harold planted this rose bush for our 25th anniversary, she would tell me, as I carefully treated it for black spot. And this herb garden was my idea. I wanted to be able to cook with fresh basil and oregano. Slowly, miraculously, the garden began to respond to our care. The roses, freed from their fungal infection and properly pruned, began to produce new growth. The flower beds, cleared of weeds and amended with compost, started to show signs of the perennials that had been hidden underneath. The herb garden, replanted with new seedlings, began to fill in with fragrant green growth. "It's working," Grace said one afternoon as we stood back to admire our progress. "Sophia, it's actually working. I can't believe how much better everything looks." Plants want to grow. Sometimes they just need a little help to remember how. Grace had become more than just a gardening project to me. She was a friend, a mentor, someone who understood my love of growing things. She would make us lunch every day, usually sandwiches and homemade soup, and we would eat together on her back porch, talking about plants and life and everything in between. "You have a gift, dear," she told me one day as we watched a butterfly land on the newly blooming lavender. "You understand plants in a way that can't be taught. It's intuitive, natural. You're going to do wonderful things with your degree." I smiled, but inside I was worried. My degree felt more uncertain every day. The bills at home were piling up, and I could see the stress wearing on my mother. I'd been picking up extra shifts at the bookstore, but it wasn't enough. We were falling further behind on rent, and I was starting to think that maybe Mom was right. Maybe I needed to take time off from school and find full-time work. But I didn't want to burden Grace with my problems. She was dealing with her own challenges. I could see that money was tight for her too, though she never complained. She was living on a fixed income, and I knew that even the small amounts she was spending on garden supplies were a stretch for her budget. It was on a Thursday afternoon in late May that my world came crashing down. I came home from Grace's house, dirty and tired, but happy from a productive day of planting new annuals, to find my mother sitting at the kitchen table with a piece of paper in her hands. Her face was pale, and I could see that she'd been crying. "Mom, what's wrong?" She held up the paper without saying a word. It was an official notice, printed on legal letterhead with bold letters across the top that made my stomach drop. Notice to pay rent or quit premises. I sank into the chair across from her and read the notice with growing dread. We had 30 days to pay the full amount we owed, $2,400 in back rent, or vacate the premises. After that, if we were still in the apartment, the landlord would begin formal eviction proceedings.
$2,400? I said, the number feeling impossible. "Mom, where are we going to get $2,400? "I don't know, sweetheart," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been trying so hard to find work, but everything pays minimum wage, and even if I started tomorrow, I couldn't make that much in 30 days. I looked at the signature at the bottom of the notice. Grace Butler, property manager. The name meant nothing to me. It was probably just some property management company that handled the building for the actual owner. "We'll figure something out," I said, though I had no idea what. Maybe I can take out more student loans or get a cash advance on my credit card. But even as I said it, I knew it was hopeless. I was already maxed out on financial aid, and my credit card had a limit of $500. There was no way we could come up with that much money in 30 days. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, trying to think of solutions that didn't exist. I thought about dropping out of school, about moving back in with my aunt in another state, about all the ways my life was about to change. The next morning, I almost didn't go to Grace's house. I was too depressed, too worried about my own problems to focus on gardening. But I'd made a commitment, and Grace was counting on me. I couldn't let her down just because my own life was falling apart. "You're quiet today, dear," Grace observed, as we worked together to stake some newly planted delphiniums. "Is everything all right?" "Just tired," I lied, not wanting to burden her with my problems. I had a late night studying. But Grace was perceptive, and I could see her watching me with concern as we worked. Finally, she set down her trowel and turned to face me. "Sophia, I've lived long enough to recognize when someone is carrying a heavy burden. What's really wrong?" I tried to hold it together, but something about her kind and understanding expression broke down my defenses. Before I knew it, I was telling her everything, about my mother's job loss, about our financial struggles, about the eviction notice we'd received. "I'm so sorry," I said, wiping tears from my eyes. "I know you have your own problems, and here I am dumping mine on you." "Oh, sweetheart," Grace said, pulling me into a hug that smelled like lavender and soil. "I'm so sorry you're going through this. $2,400 is a lot of money. I don't know what we're going to do. I might have to drop out of school, find full-time work. I probably won't be able to finish helping with your garden." "Don't you worry about the garden," Grace said firmly. "You've already given me so much. Because of you, I have hope again. I can see Harold's vision coming back to life." We worked in companionable silence for the rest of the morning, but I could tell that Grace was thinking about something. She kept glancing at me with an expression I couldn't read, and she seemed distracted in a way that was unusual for her. "Sophia," she said, as we were cleaning up our tools, "would you mind if I came to visit you sometime? I'd love to see your apartment, meet your mother." The request surprised me. In all the weeks we'd been working together, Grace had never expressed interest in my home life beyond our conversations. "Of course," I said, "though I should warn you, it's not much to look at, and it might not be ours much longer. I'd still like to see it. How about tomorrow afternoon? I could bring some flowers from the garden, brighten up your space a little." I gave her my address and thought nothing more of it. I was too worried about our eviction notice to focus on anything else. The next day was Saturday, and I was home studying for finals when I heard a knock at the door. I opened it to find Grace standing in the hallway, holding a beautiful bouquet of flowers from her garden, roses, lavender, and sweet peas that filled the air with their fragrance. "Grace," I said, surprised. "Come in, please. Mom's at a job interview, but she should be back soon." Grace stepped into our small apartment, and I watched her take in our modest surroundings: the secondhand furniture, the small kitchen, the plants I'd arranged on every available service. "Oh my," she said, looking around with genuine admiration. "Sophia, this is lovely. You've created such a warm, welcoming space." "Thank you," I said, pleased by her reaction. "Can I get you some tea or water?" "Tea would be lovely," Grace said, but she seemed distracted, almost nervous. She kept looking around the apartment with an expression I couldn't read. As I was preparing the tea, I heard Grace gasp from the living room. "Sophia," she called out, her voice strange. "Could you come here for a moment?" I found her standing by our small diamond table, staring down at the eviction notice that was still lying there from the night before. Her face had gone completely pale. "Grace, are you all right?" She picked up the notice with trembling hands, reading it carefully. When she looked up at me, her eyes were filled with tears. "Sophia," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need to tell you something I should have told you weeks ago." "What is it?" Grace sat down heavily in one of our kitchen chairs, still holding the eviction notice. "My full name is Grace Butler. I own this building. I own Harmony Gardens." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. You own our building?" "I inherited it from Harold 2 years ago. It was his investment property, his way of ensuring we'd have income in retirement. After he died, I hired a property management company to handle the day-to-day operations, but I still review all the major decisions." I felt like the floor was falling out under me. "You signed our eviction notice." "I did," Grace said, her voice breaking. "But I didn't know. I had no idea that the Sophia Watson on the eviction list was the same Sophia who had been saving my garden, saving my life for the past month." I sank into the chair across from her, my mind reeling. The woman I'd grown to love like a grandmother, the woman whose garden I'd poured my heart into restoring, was the same person who was about to make my family homeless. "The property management company handles all the tenant communications. They send me reports, lists of late payments, recommendations for evictions. I just see names and apartment numbers on paper. I never connected the dots." I stared at the eviction notice in her hands, seeing my own name there in black and white, signed by the woman sitting across from me. "So all this time," I said slowly,
While I was helping you save your garden, you were planning to evict my family. I didn't know it was you, Grace said desperately. Sophia, you have to believe me. If I had known, I would have torn up that notice the first day we met. The irony was so cruel it was almost funny. I'd been spending every free moment helping the very person who held my family's future in her hands, and neither of us had known it. The property management company told me that the tenants in 2B had been consistently late with rent, that they were unresponsive to payment plans, that eviction was the only option, Grace continued. I trusted their judgment. I should have asked more questions, should have insisted on meeting with tenants personally before approving something so drastic. I thought about all our conversations over the past month, all the times I could have mentioned where I lived, all the opportunities we'd had to discover this connection, but I'd been so focused on keeping my problems separate from our friendship that I'd never brought up the specifics of my housing situation. Grace stood up abruptly, crumpling the eviction notice in her hands. I'll fix this, right now. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number, pacing around our small living room as she waited for someone to answer. Amanda? This is Grace Butler. I need you to immediately cancel the eviction proceedings for apartment 2B at Harmony Gardens. Yes, I'm sure. No, I don't care what the policy is. Because I said so, and I own the building. I listened in amazement as Grace, the gentle woman who cried over dying roses, transformed into a force of nature, issuing orders with the authority of someone who was clearly used to being obeyed. I want a new payment plan drawn up immediately, something reasonable, something that takes into account the tenant's current financial situation. No, Amanda, you're not listening. I want this handled today, not next week, because if it's not handled today, you'll be looking for a new job on Monday. She hung up the phone and turned back to me, her expression fierce and determined. The eviction is canceled. You're not going anywhere. Grace, I can't let you do this just because we're friends, I said, though relief was flooding through me. We still owe the money. We still can't pay. Then we'll figure out a payment plan that works, something reasonable, something that doesn't put your family on the street. But the property management company, your other tenants, what will they think if you start making exceptions? Grace sat down across from me, taking my hands in hers. Sophia, do you know why I was crying in my garden that first day you found me? I shook my head. I was crying because I felt like I'd lost everything that mattered to Harold and me. Our garden was dying, and with it all the memories we'd created together. I felt like I was failing him, failing the legacy we'd built. But then you appeared, like an angel sent to save what I thought was lost forever. You didn't just save my plants, Sophia. You saved my connection to Harold, my sense of purpose, my hope for the future. I was just doing what I love. Exactly. You were following your passion, using your gifts to help someone else, expecting nothing in return. Do you know how rare that is? I thought about all the hours I'd spent in her garden, all the joy I'd found in watching dead plants come back to life, all the satisfaction I'd felt in seeing Grace's face light up as her husband's vision was restored. You gave me back my garden. You gave me back my memories, my connection to the man I loved. You gave me a reason to get up in the morning, something to look forward to. How could I possibly put a price on that? But Grace, no buts, she said. Besides, I have a proposition for you. What kind of proposition? Grace smiled, and I could see the wheels turning in her mind. I own 12 properties around town, apartment buildings, a few small office complexes, even a couple of houses. Most of them have landscaping that's been neglected for years because I've been too overwhelmed to deal with it properly. I began to see where she was going with this. What if I hired you as my landscaping consultant? She continued. You could design and maintain gardens for all my properties. It would be real work, real pay, and you could do it around your class schedule. Grace, that's incredibly generous, but I'm still just a student. I don't have a degree yet. I don't have professional experience. You have something better than a degree, Grace said. You have intuition, passion, and a gift for bringing dead things back to life. Plus, you'd be working for someone who trusts you completely. I felt tears starting to fall as the magnitude of what she was offering sank in. Not just a job, but a career. Not just income, but the chance to do what I loved while finishing my education. There's one condition, Grace added, with a mischievous smile. What's that? You have to let me help you finish your degree. I want to pay for your final semester, your books, whatever you need. Consider it an investment in my future landscaping consultant. I was crying openly now, overwhelmed by the generosity of this woman who had started as a stranger and become so much more. Grace, I can't accept all of this. It's too much. Sophia, she said gently, when Harold and I were young, we struggled too. We lived paycheck to paycheck, worried about bills, wondered if we'd ever get ahead. An older couple, the Johnsons, took a chance on Harold, gave him a job when no one else would, helped us buy our first house. She paused, looking around our small apartment with understanding eyes. Mr. Johnson told Harold something I've never forgotten. Success isn't just about what you achieve for yourself. It's about what you make possible for others. Harold and I were blessed in our lives, and now I have the chance to pass that blessing on. What if I disappoint you? What if I'm not as good as you think I am? Grace laughed, the sound warm and full of confidence. Sophia, I've watched you bring my garden back from the dead with nothing but knowledge, determination, and love. I've seen you work in the rain, in the heat, on your hands and knees in the dirt, never complaining, always focused on making something beautiful. If that's not the definition of someone I want to invest in, I don't know what is. That afternoon, Grace called her lawyer and had him drop a formal employment contract. She called the university's financial aid office and arranged to pay my remaining tuition directly. But most importantly, she called my mother when she got home from her job interview and invited her over for dinner. Mrs. Watson, Grace said as we sat around her dining room table that evening, I want you to know that your daughter is extraordinary. She has a gift that can't be taught and a heart that makes everything she touches more beautiful. My mother, still overwhelmed by the day's revelations, could barely speak. I don't know how to thank you, she said finally. You don't need to thank me, Grace replied. Sophia has already given me more than I could ever repay. I'm just returning the favor. Over the next few months, my life transformed in ways I could never have imagined. I finished my degree with honors, writing my senior thesis on urban garden restoration using Grace's property as my primary case study. I developed landscaping plans for all of Grace's buildings, creating beautiful, sustainable gardens that increased property values and tenant satisfaction. But more than that, Grace became the grandmother I'd never had. She taught me about business, about investing, about the responsibilities that come with success. She shared stories about Harold, about their life together, about the dreams they'd built and the legacy they'd created. You know, she told me one day as we worked together in her garden, now fully restored and more beautiful than ever, Harold would have loved you. He always said that the best investments aren't in stocks or real estate, but in people, in their dreams, their potential, their capacity to make the world better. With my botany degree in hands, I officially launched Watson Garden Design, with Grace as my first and most important client. The business grew quickly, fueled by word-of-mouth recommendations and the stunning transformations I was creating at Grace's properties. But the most meaningful project was always Grace's original garden. We continued to work on it together, adding new sections, trying new plants, constantly evolving and improving Harold's original vision. It became a living testament to the power of second chances, of unexpected friendships, of the magic that happens when someone believes in your potential. The garden that had started as a dying dream had become a living symbol of hope, proving that with the right care, attention, and love, anything can bloom again. An absolutely beautiful story about how a simple act of kindness can bloom into something life-changing. What do you think of Grace's decision to help Sophia after discovering she was about to evict her family? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were inspired by this heartwarming story about unexpected connections and the power of compassion, please show your support by hitting that like button, and be sure to subscribe for more uplifting stories that prove kindness always comes back to us. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.